promoting mindful well-being in everyday life. This is the Pragmatic Alchemy Podcast with your host, Courtney Edwards.
Hello, and welcome back to the Pragmatic Alchemy Podcast. I am your host, Courtney Edwards, and today I am joined by licensed mental health counselor, Reiki master, and spiritual coach, Vienna D'Aprile. Vienna and I are going to have a conversation today, and I think this is going to be one of the beginning conversations that I plan to have a few of these with some other folks because it's such a wide topic, but we're going to have a conversation today about how to incorporate a spiritual practice into our overall well-being practices. So one of the things I had talked about early in the podcast was connecting my thoughts of well-being around Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the two top levels of that hierarchy really deal with self-actualization, which has a spiritual connotation to it, as well as transcendence needs, which is this idea of belonging to something bigger than ourselves. And so these are really important facets of well-being, in my opinion. And since that topic can take so many directions, I want to keep this conversation going, but I'm really excited that Vienna is here to talk with us about how she incorporates this into her work. And hopefully we will have some nice takeaways for you by the end of this conversation if it's something that you are looking to bring more to life in your own daily well-being practice. So Vienna, welcome. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Courtney. I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, I'm glad you're here too. So I guess where I was interested in starting, I teach counselor education at SUNY New Paltz, so I know the curricula, not a lot of emphasis on spirituality. So can you just tell us a little bit about how this came to be one of the central parts of your professional work, since I'm going to assume that it wasn't a huge part of your actual clinical training?
Right. Yeah. So, and I agree, really, it wasn't much in our clinical training, maybe mentioned for 5 minutes that studies show having a spirituality practice can help with depression and anxiety, etc. So I consider myself to be very spiritual, and I've been that way my entire life. I was raised in a religion, which for me personally had some positives and negatives. And, I kind of, as I grew up, separated from the religion a little bit and just focused solely on spirituality with myself. And again, connecting with that higher power, starting meditation, learning about manifestation and things like that. And so that's what I would do a lot in my personal life. And then being trained as a therapist, it was all like, make sure you use evidence-based practices and, all, just like science and everything. And so I just kept spirituality out of my practice. But I noticed when I was working in a clinic at the time after I finished grad school, and certain clients would come to me and share that they have their own spiritual practices. And one client told me she practiced Reiki and things like that. And I noticed that those conversations really lit me up so much. And I was like, wow, this is great. This is okay too, like, even though I wanted to like look over my shoulder, like, is this okay to talk about? And obviously in the therapy room, there still are certain boundaries, like if for example, if a client of mine was really intuitive, I'm not going to, as a therapist, be like, tell me my future, so there are obviously boundaries in the therapy room, but learning how spirituality was helping my clients and just me being there as that non-judgmental reflector for them, they're like, is it okay? Like, I know this is a little woo-woo and weird if I'm talking about like energy and Reiki and things like that. I'm like, no, it's not weird at all. Like, tell me how it helps you. So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
eventually I realized that I like to incorporate it into therapy for people who are open to it. I ended up, opening up my own private practice. And even in the first year of my private practice, I still didn't really, I put it maybe as one of my specialties, spirituality, but I still wouldn't bring it up, like unless a client brought it up to me. And then spirituality just became more and more prevalent in my life, in my everyday 24/7. And it is such a part of who I am that I couldn't stand to separate it anymore from my business. So now I have changed my business name to the spiritual therapist. And so that now I can just market myself in that way, saying like, this is what I offer as well. So now, more and more people are coming to me that want to incorporate that into therapy as well.
Right, right. They're coming to you for that. It's funny, I rebranded a while ago from a name I had made up that nobody could ever pronounce or remember, which I realized was not a sound business practice. And so I really kept coming up with, this idea of alchemy kept coming up. And so that was, I realized I needed to respond to that and invite that in. And so I was talking to a business coach who's a friend of mine. And I said, I'm thinking of changing my business name to Alchemy Behavioral Health Coaching. And she was like, I love it. I think it encapsulates everything that you do. She's like, but, one thing you might want to consider is some people might think it's a little woo. And I just remember being like, but those are the people that I want.
Exactly.
Like, that's the work I want to do. And so I do feel
Yes.
like sometimes it can be really helpful to just call it what it is and put it out there, because then you're going to attract the folks that really are they're going to want what you're offering, and they're going to respond to what you're offering. I really love that. One of the things you mentioned, saying how early in your practice you didn't really bring it up unless the client did. I've actually started incorporating it into my, I do like a first session, like exploration interview. And one of the things that I have a checklist of different facets of people's lives, home, work, relationships, sex, like all these things, like how are things going in these areas? And one of them is spiritual fulfillment. And so frequently, that's the one. Like, I can ask people about their sex lives, and they're like, yeah, it's great, or, oh, it's terrible. But I ask about, do you have a spiritual practice? And they just stare at me blankly. Or I'll get that quick response of, well, I'm not religious. So when you hear that, when you hear somebody answer a question about spirituality with, I'm not religious, what comes to your mind, or how do you respond to that response?
Well, I would probably outwardly just respond, okay, just like meting them where they're at. And then
Me
of
neither.
course later, later maybe asking if there's a reason for that, or if they had any experiences that led them to feel this way. So that would probably be one of my first thoughts is, I wonder why they were so quick to say that. Is there some kind of negative experience or trauma? Because unfortunately that happens too. That drove them away from religion.
Yeah. And how do you define? I know this is a huge question, but how do you define spirituality, and how is it different, or how is it the same as religion?
Yeah. So I will say that, let's see. Let me think on that for 1 second.
Yeah.
So I believe every religion, of course, has spiritual components to it. Yet each religion obviously also has its own set of rules that I believe were, man-made. Or of course, perhaps there's spiritual influences with certain rules, and maybe, some of them resonate with people, but they may not always resonate with anyone. Whereas spirituality is something that I feel can resonate with everybody, even if a person doesn't define themselves as spiritual. And I can maybe get into more of that later. Let's see. So just moving towards the definition of spirituality, I would say it is having your own spirituality is a connection to yourself. I'd say like capital S, or connection to your own spirit or soul, and also connection to, like you said before, something greater than ourselves, a higher power, potentially, you know, God or the universe, or however a person wants to define it. But when we also say something greater than ourselves, we can even connect that to nature. We can connect that just to the earth, like the world that we're living in, and like the other human beings that live on this world. Like there is, you are not alone. Like there is this connection from yourself to something greater, whatever you want to define that as. Yeah, that's part of it. I want to talk for like 20 more minutes on that question, but I'm going to start there.
Oh, see, and I was going to say, please do go right ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you had mentioned when folks don't identify themselves as spiritual, but yet you still see those threads of spirituality within them. What might that look like?
Yeah. So, even if a person doesn't believe in God, because I think that's how a lot of people do define spirituality, is believing in God. And I want to change that to, again, something greater than ourselves. So even if you're not connecting to what you feel is spirit, then, like I said, like you can connect to other humans on this earth, you can connect to nature, like you can connect to maybe this, like a higher intelligence of nature, a higher intelligence of your own body, your higher self. And like defining higher self, like that doesn't even have to be spiritual. It could just be this image of my future self, you know, that I want to look towards as a goal for myself of where I want to be in the future. So I guess with that, spirituality also has to do with self-reflection and growth. And I would say also has to do with finding meaning and purpose in your life. And whereas I'd say, you know, if people define themselves as spiritual, most likely, you know, maybe they find meaning in this life by connecting to what happens after we die or what has happened before we got here. But if a person doesn't believe in that, they can still find a deeper meaning to their life and a purpose to their life, even if that purpose is, I'm here to have a good time.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that, because one of the things that I often grapple with is the role of a moral compass that's wrapped up in religion and spirituality. And, you know, so for me, it does, growing up in a Christian church, it very much had that connotation of, this is how you know what's right and what's wrong, you know, until I got old enough to realize that not all of those rules applied to everyone, and not equally. And,
good point.
but I do think, that idea of meaning and connection, I find it to be a helpful tool, and this might be where it interplays with the therapeutic process too, but I find it to be just such a helpful tool in optimism and hopefulness, and not even necessarily in being tied to, like, again, like kind of the ways that I was raised in a Christian church. This idea of hopefulness was, you're going to reach paradise in the afterlife, right? And I don't necessarily see it as hopefulness in that way anymore, but I see our interconnectedness as inherently hopeful all by itself, right? The fact that we do all, you know, we're all just doing the best we can, and we're just trying to make it through every day the best we can. And that to me is actually a really beautiful feeling, you know, even when things are hard and difficult. So, I think when we're challenged, having something to come home to is what spirituality can mean, it's one of the things it means to me. Yeah.
I love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
So what does your spiritual practice look like? You mentioned meditation and you're a Reiki master. So do you have any rituals, any kind of daily or frequent consistent habits that you engage with that
Yes.
fill you up?
Yeah. I have a bunch. And I'm very much like, feminine flow, yin energy, just like, so for me, it's, for some people, they need a lot of structure and it's helpful for them to do the exact same thing every day at the same time. And for me, I tend to stay, generally similar activities, but I also am now at a point where I can tune into myself and figure out what it is I need today. But I will say, um, if I don't full out meditate, I at least come to my breath. So I think that is like the simplest, most basic starting point to a spiritual practice, I would say, is the breath. There's definitely a lot of pressure on meditation, to meditate, and most of us are not great at it. I wouldn't call myself an expert either. It's obvious, it's, as so many people have said, meditation is about the practice of continuing to refocus and continuing to bring it back over and over again. But, if that's too hard and puts pressure on anybody and gets too stressful, could literally take 5 deep breaths. And that can be a moment that you get to connect with that stillness that is within you, that I believe is our soul, or our, capital S self. And with that connection, again, it's like we're simultaneously connecting with ourselves and creating with something greater, like that stillness. And that, I believe, just like you said too, is that kind of coming back home to, coming back home.
And I think it's so challenging because this society that we live in does not honor quiet or stillness.
No.
There's so many messages, focused on hustle, and it's just so loud. Our whole planet is just so loud all of the time. And that begins, I think, to feel really normal for people. And so then that stillness can be really uncomfortable. And even, for myself, like you mentioned, not being an expert in meditation, and I'm a certified meditation teacher, and I'm definitely not an expert in it. And I just try to notice times, if I'm meditating or if I'm in Shavasana and I just want to wiggle out of it because it's so uncomfortable. And if you encounter that in the work that you do, how do you help support folks that just are so disconnected from stillness and quiet because of the demands of the world that we live in? How do you support them, or what, what suggestions or strategies or tips do you share?
Yeah, thank you for that. You're so right. We're, it's so loud out there and in our brains, and we are so overstimulated and, work. And if I sit still, I'm not being productive and all the things. But, yeah. And so there are also times myself, of course, where I don't feel like sitting and meditating, and normalizing it, that it happens to everybody, even someone who's a meditation teacher. And so it's really hard to go from chaos to all of a sudden expect yourself to be sitting still and have no thoughts. So I believe in a transition of getting there. So what I do personally, if I notice I'm not wanting to sit still, is I'll start with doing some yoga and movement, or even some mindful dancing. But I think since more people know about yoga, we'll start there. So it's kind of like when your brain is, I'm using my hands a lot, like when your brain's going crazy, just moving my hands all over the place. Then I kind of like to match my body to that a little bit, I like to move around, And that way also, like, moving my body is a good distraction from my thoughts, and then I'm bringing my attention to my body and out of my head.
Mm-hmm.
And then after my movement comes, then I can sit down and try harder to meditate,
Mm-hmm.
so again, like that transition and coming out of your head into your body, then
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
It sounds like you're describing like syncing them up, that
Yes.
because we do tend to get stuck in thought cycles and dissociate from our physical selves quite a
Yes.
lot, that it's almost like that idea of bringing them back together. And I that approach sounds really appealing of, instead of kind of forcing your brain into a container that it's not ready to be in, can you use your body to match where your brain is? I think a lot of people try to do it from the other direction. I'm going to
Right.
make my brain be still right now because I'm in a seated position. And then that feels just really challenging. And, one of the things I believe, I have some pretty loose structures around meditation practice and teaching it and how people should, or, should not, I don't like those words, but, how they should approach
Yeah.
it. And I always tell folks, like, if it feels like there should be we should be pushing ourselves a little bit to to kind of push those outer edges of what we're comfortable with in a meditation practice. But I also feel like if it's terrible and it feels like torture, then you're not going to do it. So
Right.
whatever strategies or tools will help it just feel more accessible, I'm like, do that, and it sounds like
Exactly.
that's a great strategy to, instead of trying to like beat your brain into submission, which it's not going to
Yes.
do because it's a thinking
Right.
structure and that's its whole job. See if
Mm-hmm.
you can at least connect your internal thought-based experience into your physical presence. That's really
Right.
awesome.
Yeah, and one other idea for that as well is just starting off with any other mindfulness practice, so that, because meditation can feel like torture sometimes. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it's hard, and it takes time. So, um, one of my favorite things is mindful eating, of course, and depending on a person's comfortability with that. Um, so any mindfulness practice is basically practicing something while being present in the moment and fully experiencing it instead of our brains being somewhere else. So, for example, if you want to try mindful eating, trying your best to use all five senses to be present with your food. I'm just like imagining a strawberry. So, feeling what the strawberry feels like in your fingers, looking at it, noticing all the little seeds, noticing the different colors on it, smelling it first, like, then maybe just like taking a little lick of it, or like just like like rubbing your teeth on it just a little bit. So like really slowing down and being mindful with anything, but in this scenario we're using food. And chances are you're going to recognize the benefits of being present in that moment. And also, like, this can what's the word I'm looking for? This can just bleed into your life practice as well. So many of us are on autopilot because we're so used to doing that we don't even enjoy our free time. We don't enjoy our time off because we're so in our heads. And it's like, bam, the weekend's over or whatever, your time off is over. And you're like, oh my gosh, why did that go so fast? I was in my head all weekend, not enjoying time with my family. So anyway, that's another idea, is to start with mindfulness and recognize the benefits of being present.
Yeah, I really, really love that. And that kind of leads me to one of the other questions I had for you, which is when folks are acknowledging obstacles to getting started. I don't have time. I don't have space. I don't have a quiet meditation room. I don't have time to go to yoga class. What are some of the things that you suggest to folks in those situations to help make this feel accessible and not like it's more work that they need to incorporate into their lives, but just that it's an accessible practice?
Sure, totally. And that's valid. And when it comes to time, one of the first things I will say to somebody is Well, I remember listening to a video about stoicism, and I don't remember who said it, but the man who was talking used this quote that was, "It's it's not that we don't have enough time, we just tend to waste a lot of it." So that's something I start out with, is to have a person look at their day, and especially, I hate to say that this is my first go-to, but how much time are you spending on your phone scrolling through social media?
Mhm.
Because, and I'm not going to act innocent. Sometimes I get caught up and I just mindlessly scrolled for 45 minutes.
Mhm.
And so first, notice, if you can, where are you mindlessly wasting your time? I'm not saying it's, bad to scroll. I'm not saying it's bad to watch TV. It's not bad to do anything, but like, just observe your day and see where you feel you may be wasting your time, and see, okay, can I do some sort of meditation practice for 5 minutes? And then I can scroll for 40 minutes still, like I still have time to scroll. Um, so maybe starting there. And then, of course, the first like group of people coming to mind are like parents of toddlers, where I get it as best I can, as a non-parent, that you are running around chasing your toddler constantly. You don't even have time to shower, basically. So that is super challenging. But that means you may have to schedule 5 minutes for yourself. When your kids go down for a nap, if possible, can you just make sure you schedule literally 5 minutes?
Mhm.
That's all it takes.
Yeah,
um yeah.
that I think is a helpful starting point for a lot of folks, because I think we have this idea of I have to practice yoga for an hour or I have to meditate for a half hour. And then that can feel really inaccessible, overwhelming, like more work in an already stretched too thin life. But yeah, those couple of minutes during the pandemic, I was recording 2-minute meditations for Instagram. And it was
That's
based on
awesome.
that belief, like everybody's got 2 minutes. we
That's
can
right.
do we can do 2 minutes, and that 2 minutes is better than 0 minutes. And so if
Hmm.
that's where you are, start there. That's a perfectly great
Absolutely.
place. The other thing I wonder about is what your thoughts are on then incorporating, like using that example, parents, like incorporating your children into
Mm.
it. So one of the things I used to do with my daughter when she was younger is I have this little round stone that says Om is where the heart is. And I would
Mhm.
have her lay on the floor, and I would put it just kind of over her diaphragm, and I would say, "Can you watch the rock go
Mm.
up and down?" And so it was sort of teaching her deep breathing, but then it gave me a couple of quiet minutes to also model that and do my own breathing. And I found it a helpful way to insert some quiet breaths for myself, but then also teaching her that skill. Because then when she would get upset, I could say to her, "Remember how to breathe?" And then she'd go run and get the
Mm.
rock, lay down on the ground and do it.
Yes.
It took a while for her to transfer
Oh.
the skill that she didn't need to lay on the ground with the rock, but she eventually got there.
Oh, thank you for saying that. That's huge, because that's such a benefit for moms and their child, moms and dads. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
So yeah, what a beautiful practice, to be able to practice with your child. And yeah, then that's when they know, it's breathing time or it's quiet time, and you can do it together. And I'm sure that you'll enjoy that time with your child. And and then again, back to just mindfulness practice, remembering to, wherever you can throughout your day, to incorporate that. Just, and the easiest way to do it is tuning into your five senses
Mhm.
and focusing on fully experiencing all five of them, if possible.
Yeah, I love that. Shifting gears a little tiny bit, what can you tell folks about Reiki? Because I
Ooh,
don't
yeah.
know that everybody knows what it is, what it entails. I think even I've never had a Reiki session, so I think I have a vague understanding
Hmm.
of just sort of what I've seen on social media. But can you tell folks a little bit about how you got involved in that work and just sort of what that practice is?
Absolutely. So Reiki is, basically energetic healing. So for example, let's say you got a cut with, you cut yourself and you had to put a band-aid on it, right? So that is a physical ailment where you need to put a band-aid, or if it got worse, maybe you would go see a medical doctor. And I, obviously agree with treating yourself physically and medically if necessary. Like, God forbid fell off your bike and broke your leg, don't go to a Reiki practitioner first, obviously. Like, go to the hospital. So,
I
however,
appreciate that disclaimer. Yeah.
yes, disclaimer. But but studies have shown when that happens, if a person is injured or hurt, that incorporating both medical treatment and Reiki, the energetic healing, tends to speed up the healing process. Because while yes, we are physical beings, we are also energetic beings. Like, there is, and this doesn't have to be woo woo. Like, this is scientific too. Like, we used to learn in science class about atoms and molecules, and that there's like little teeny tiny spaces in between molecules, even if they are solids, right? So it's almost like the medical treatment is working on the solids and what we can see physically, whereas the Reiki is working on the energy, like the space between, and like the subatomic particles that can't be seen by the human eye. And when we practice Reiki, when a practitioner gives somebody Reiki, we tend to focus on the chakras, which are these, energy points throughout the body. There's the 7 main chakras throughout the center meridian of the body, from the crown, which is the top of the head, to your root, which is like the pelvic area, down to your toes. But then there are actually a bunch of other different chakras, like little tiny chakras throughout the body. But in a Reiki session, we tend to focus on those chakras. And then if the practitioner, feels intuitively, or if the client asks, hey, like, I have heart problems, for example, or I have, I got my gallbladder removed, or whatever the heck, then maybe we'll send extra energy to like those certain parts. And Reiki can help with a lot of things. So I know I mentioned physical ailments, of course, but it can also help with emotional healing. It can help with mental blocks and certain patterns. It can, clear out energetic blocks that we store in our bodies, because as you probably know, as a mental health professional, that we tend to also store trauma and we store emotions in our bodies as well. So clearing out those blocks energetically can just really do wonders. Like, it can lead to less, it can reduce stress, it can bring about more joy, more confidence, it can improve your sex life. Like, there's just so many things that incorporating Reiki can do. And again, I personally emphasize like Reiki along with whatever other practices you're doing. I'm not going to say like Reiki is the only way. I agree with obviously going to therapy. I agree with seeing, medical professionals if you need it. But I just think, yeah, Reiki is just this extra energetic bonus, of being held through your healing.
And do you see some people therapeutically and some people for Reiki and some people for both? Is that how your practice generally works?
Yes. Yeah. So, the high majority of my clients are therapy clients. And I also tend to, again, on our like first initial phone call, just similar like you do, I ask them if they know about Reiki. I tell them about it. And for therapy clients, while we're processing things in therapy, I will ask them, is it okay if I give you some Reiki while we talk about this? So I'll incorporate it into sessions. And then, yeah, sometimes people will just schedule me for solely Reiki.
Okay. And we're going to link to all your info in the show notes, but where are you practicing if folks are interested in learning a little bit more about that part of your work?
Sure. So I tend to post most of my stuff on Instagram. So it's at the dot spiritual therapist on Instagram. And then I have a website, which is thespiritualtherapist.net. So they can find some information on that. And for the most part, I'm doing like pretty much all virtual right now. Like I currently don't have an office space, but if the weather's nice, I'm willing to meet, someone at a park if they're willing and comfortable to do that, or a public location where we can still find privacy. And I have a couple friends who own like studios and things like that occasionally I can contact them. But the area I'm located in is near Poughkeepsie, New York. So yeah.
Okay. I guess my last question, and it's a big one, so
Yeah,
get ready.
I'm ready.
Yep. One of the things that my journey along this practice, like I mentioned before, grew up in a Christian household, but I was just always really kind of curious about everything. And so was pretty comfortable exploring different things. I tend to be a little bit of a nerd, so I like to learn about things and just sort of um, then gravitate towards what resonates, what feels true, what sits nicely in my soul. But if somebody either has never had any spiritual or religious influences in their life, or if they just really feel like how they've been raised is no longer serving them, but they don't know where to go, do you have advice for folks that are maybe just feeling adrift and they know, it's not necessarily the logistics of having a spiritual practice, but maybe that bigger question of how do I even know, what is it for me? Is it organized religion? Is it Buddhism? Is it meditation? Is it Reiki? Is it tarot? Is it astrology? Like, how do you help people find their spot or spots?
That's a great question. I have a couple thoughts. This this first answer isn't super tangible, but if that person does believe, or maybe even like just wants to toy with the fact that there is a higher power, I would invite them to kind of ask or pray, like however they would want to word it, or even if they don't want to go there, just like setting the intention for themselves that as I go about my day, and kind of follow my own intuition, I ask for, an opportunity to come along with me where I can recognize that, oh, that's something that interests me. I'm going to follow that. And just of course asking them to be patient, as they may not find that today, or they may find like a baby step today, even though it'll literally be like, oh, there's an open mic night at a bar tomorrow. Like it could seemingly have nothing to do with spirituality, but just I would suggest them being open to receiving whatever it is, like whatever, guidance that they can, and trusting their own intuition of this feels right to me. I'm going to follow that and just see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that's an acceptable answer for people, because I know that maybe a little.
I think, yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me, and I think you started that sentence by saying this is kind of vague, but so is spirituality.
That's right.
Right? Like it doesn't have a firm container for all of us, and I just know in my life I have found how one has led to the other. So even just looking at, kind of one of the most prevalent guiding forces in my life is Buddhist practices, which I came to through yoga, which I came to through the fitness center that I belonged to in Westchester County when I was 25, and they offered yoga and Pilates, and I just started going to yoga, and I was like, oh, I actually like this. And then through that, and that was a physical endeavor to begin with for me. It wasn't something I was doing for spirituality. But then that led to Buddhism, which made me feel more connected with nature, which then led me into, what we would call, witchy kind of practices, which led me to tarot and astrology. And, so it's just like, sometimes it's just having that open-hearted curiosity to just follow what presents itself and see what hits. Yeah.
Yes.
I said that was my last question, but I lied. Are there any specific resources, Instagram accounts, books, teachers that you really resonate with, that you like to share with clients or with folks who are interested in learning more? Any resources that we should put in the show notes for folks?
That's a great question. Let's see. I know I have like so many, and personally I tend to, it's just how I do things. I like kind of take a dip into so many different things, like, and
Yes.
like,
Me
and it's
too.
really, to be honest, I'll just being honest, like I rarely finish an entire book, because like I want to like, then something else catches my eye, which like,
Right.
is that good? Is that good or bad? I don't know, but that's
No,
what
but
I
I
do.
appreciate it because I'm the same way. And so I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, thank you.
Cool.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you too.
Yep.
It depends on where they want to start. If they're interested in like a specific religion, to be honest with you, like I'm not even sure what book off the top of my head I would go for. I think Buddhism is a great place to start, even if you don't want to become a Buddhist, and just learning about the principles, because I think that the principles are so universal, and are actually in a lot of religions, like unconditional love, obviously, and, and empathy and things like that. My brain keeps going to like law of attraction and manifestation. That is really, that's getting more and more popular, but I actually do view manifestation as a spiritual practice. So in regards to that, if you don't know Abraham Hicks, look up Abraham Hicks and Louise Hay, and Wayne Dyer. That actually, learning about law of attraction, like it was like I was already spiritual, but that almost gave me a second spiritual awakening when I learned about law of attraction. So that's, and Gabby Bernstein too. Gabby Bernstein actually also, she was in recovery. She's in recovery. She's been sober for a long time now. So like she also kind of has that spiritual component with her recovery. And she's awesome. So yeah, that's where my brain is going, is like manifestation stuff.
Yeah.
And Gabby Bernstein also, she talks about like connecting with spirit guides in the universe too. So I really like her. Yeah.
Awesome. I'll link to all of that in the show notes. So if anybody's looking to learn more about that specific topic, or just curious, as I tend to be curious, that might be a good place to start. Vienna, was there anything that we didn't get to that you had wished that I would bring up?
Let me think for a moment. No, I just want to say that getting to know yourself, to love and accept yourself, I also believe is a spiritual practice, and such a foundation of healing.
Yeah.
So, and unconditional love is a part of spirituality for sure. So if you can do that with yourself first, it's only going to get better. And, that love you have for yourself will shine out into the world. And so I just want to make sure I say that.
Yeah, that is a very, very beautiful point. I think my very, very favorite spiritual practice is loving kindness meditation, metta meditation. And I always make sure to remind folks when I'm leading it that they should say a round of loving kindness for their own selves, because we tend to think about how we're going to, impact the world around us, and we forget that we have to start on the inside before we can do any of the good work on the outside. So I love that.
Yeah. And when we can practice compassion and non-judgment towards ourselves, it's going to show up for other people. And that again is a part of spiritual practice, a part of making a positive impact and having meaning, on those around you and in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Vienna, thank you so much for being here today. This was such a lovely conversation. And I just want to make mention to listeners who obviously are not going to be able to view, you just have such a thoughtful approach to questions. And I don't know if you're aware that you do this, but you close your eyes and then you do that hand thing that that breathing teachers do, where they're like, bring the breath in, and I can see you do it. And I can just see what a gift you are to your clients that you work with, because you model it so well, to be centered, to be grounded, to be still, because you're not rushing to answer the questions, and you're not afraid to take that deep breath. And I just think that we need more permission to do that. So this was a great conversation. I feel very lit up, and
thank you.
Your presence is very, very calming. So your clients are lucky people.
Oh, I appreciate that so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for the time and the energy and the wisdom that you were able to share with us.
Thank you. Thank you again for having me.
Yeah. All right, so that is our first of several conversations on spiritual practice. I hope that you found it helpful, and maybe if you're looking to start somewhere, this gave you some nice baby steps to take towards that road. We will be back next week. If you have any topic ideas, questions, or comments, please send them to me, Courtney at shineandsoar.com, or you can fill out the contact form on shineandsoar.com/podcast. If you love this content, please share it with your people. You can find us on all the major podcast apps, and don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks so much for being with us today. Before we see you again, don't forget to take care of yourselves and each other.